Welcome back, fight fans. DAZN MMA, Sean O'Connell, Dan Hardy together once again. And Dan, the speculation and the prognostication and the guesswork is all over. We know, even though this is DAZN MMA, we're talking a little boxing here because Jake Paul and Nate Diaz, who of course is a mixed martial arts legend, has been set August 5th, Dallas, Texas, American Airlines Arena. After weeks of everyone wondering what is next for Jake Paul and what is next for Nate Diaz, that's been guessing on even longer. Now we know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I have to say I'm not surprised. I mean, I kind of expected this to be the fight to make, and I'm excited to see it. If I'm honest, that before it was made, I was kind of thinking, I think Jake's just gonna be too big for him, too strong for him, too young. You know, Nate's got a lot of damage. He's got a lot of scar tissue around his eyes. But then the more I think about it, the more I'm like, well, the Diaz brothers, it was all about jiu-jitsu and boxing, right? They've never been great at kicking. They've never been great at wrestling. But what Nate's really good at is walking people down with a high pace of boxing and beating the hell out of them. Like with shoes and big gloves on, he might look better. You know, it might suit his style more. The problem with his style with mixed martial arts, of course, is that he's really hittable because the gloves are small. But that might be because he trains in boxing gloves all the time. And I think, you know, he's quite flat-footed. I think he'll benefit in having some footwear on as well. I'm intrigued. I think, you know, of course, you know, Jake's the bigger, younger fighter, but, you know, there's 7 fights on Jake Paul's side, 34 on Nate Diaz's side. You know, there's 10 years difference in age. Wisdom counts for a lot. I just can't count Nate out because he's such a badass, and I'm intrigued about this fight.
Right now, in the early makings of this fight, Jake Paul is an odds-on, pretty big betting favorite. Is that how it should be?
I think it makes sense. I mean, you know, like I said, he's a big young kid. What is he, mid-20s, 25, 26. He works out all the time. He's in good condition. He's not taking the damage that Nate Diaz has taken. Plus, we've seen him punch. Like, we know he can punch. We know he can land a clean shot. We've seen him do it to other MMA fighters. And Nate's not the most slick of MMA fighters when it comes to head movement. I think, of course, toughness and you know, defense will play a big part in this fight. But I do expect Jake to be able to land, and I think Nate's going to get hurt when he does. You know, it changes though, doesn't it? Big gloves, standing 8 counts and stuff. Who knows what Nate's going to look like in a boxing match? I just kind of wish we'd have got it, you know, a couple of 3 years earlier.
Yeah. Well, the question that comes up, I think, on the MMA community side of this is how will it be different? Well, what can Nate Diaz do against Jake Paul that Ben Askren didn't do? That feels like a pretty obvious answer, right? Because Ben Askren is a striker versus Nate Diaz is a striker. That's night and day different, right? What can Nate Diaz do that Tyron Woodley didn't do twice? What can Nate Diaz do that Anderson Silva didn't do? Jake Paul's beat all these guys, right? And if you're a member of the MMA community who wants to see, and this is the narrative for the MMA community for the most part, you want to see this young punk YouTuber kind of put back in his place by someone who's a real seasoned professional fighter. And we've been waiting on it, and it has not happened yet. So how will Nate Diaz be a different matchup than the names I previously mentioned?
Well, you know, if you go through those names, of course, Ben Askren has no hands. You know, he's a terrible striker, made up for the fact that he's an awesome wrestler and he's able to put people in positions where he can hit them. But on the feet, he looks terrible. Tyron Woodley's, you know, a very heavy-handed fighter, but at this point in his career, he's quite timid. You know, he's always held back quite a lot, which means that Jake only has a few punches to worry about. So that's a different prospect again, because, you know, the work rate's different. The difference with Nate is that he's, you know, he's tough, he's durable, he's not got a mindset that's going to break, you know, like someone else might freeze up, or, you know, just come into the fight with no mentality to win like Ben Askren did. I mean, he was laughing as he was walking out the arena. Like, Nate's there for a fight. That's the difference. He's going to give Jake a fight. Now, if he can take the punches, it's going to be a real scrap. But if he can't, then of course, you know, everyone's going to be in agreement that Jake was just too big for him. It's kind of a, you know, there's not really much to lose for Nate here. I bet he's making a lot of money, and he's also got the opportunity to kind of wear him down a little bit. Like Anderson Silva's, you know, 10 years older than Nate Diaz. He might have the same kind of facial damage, but wear and tear wise, he is slower than he used to be. And a lot of Anderson Silva's game was around his reaction time, same as Roy Jones. He lost that as he got older, and he still played games and he still clowned around and stuff. And you know, I just feel like he's a hardened fighter. He's going to come and put pressure on Jake, and if he starts out with a good defense and lets Jake work early, then Nate might be able to wear him down late. I don't know how many rounds this is. The longer this fight goes, the better. But defense is going to be key in those first couple of rounds, while Nate pressures him without taking too many big shots.
You've used the word that I think matters most in this fight several times in talking about this matchup: pressure. Because that's what Tyron Woodley was not willing to do anymore. Anderson Silva wasn't willing to do it. There were times in the fight against Anderson Silva that I think Jake was in trouble if Anderson just kept throwing, and he didn't. You could make an argument that the way that Tommy Fury beat Jake Paul, and that was a really good fight. I think that Jake accounted well for himself against a real boxer, if we want to call Tommy Fury that. But maybe the difference was that Tommy Fury kept attacking and was offensive, willing to engage, continued to throw, would stay in the pocket when he wanted to, right? And that's something that we feel like we're going to get. You're almost guaranteed from Nate Diaz that he is going to out-throw you. He's going to outwork you. In an MMA fight, in a boxing match, I mean, Jake Paul and his camp are probably working on slipping and ripping and making sure that you whether that kind of pitter-pat 3-4 strikes and then throw something heavy afterward. And that's probably the right thing to do. But Nate Diaz isn't going to go away unless you knock him out with one of those punches. And in all that experience, Nate Diaz has only been TKO'd twice in his career. Once in 2013, the head kick from Josh Thompson that really started the beginning of the end for Nate in that fight. And obviously Jorge Masvidal in the Banff belt fight, right? So, I mean, the chin on Nate matters. The size difference certainly matters, but the work rate here that you're going to get from Nate Diaz is the most important thing. If he shows up in shape, which I think he will because of the amount of money on the line, because of the reputation on the line, because he knows what he's here to do, represent, a whole pro sports and mixed martial arts community against this YouTuber. Nate can put more punches on Jake Paul than Jake Paul's experienced so far. And I know you probably experienced this when you were training all those years for your own UFC career. When a guy comes into the gym, right? These like big, strong, young, athletic guys that have a ton of potential. What do you do, Dan Hardy, to break those guys, to make them question their confidence, to hurt their feelings? What did the Outlaw do when those guys walked into the gym, when a Jake Paul type character walked into your gym and you said, wow, he's big, he's strong, he's fast. I need to let this guy know that he is not going to enjoy the rest of this round. What did you do?
I pushed them back behind a good defense. The best thing about boxing gloves is that you have a lot more to hide behind. And I expect Nate to have a decent boxing defense. Like, you get your gloves up high and you cover and you pressure forward. And even if that means you stand in your ground and you're just covering and working your defense, maybe the occasional counter punch, but I'd also be looking to go to the body as well.
The best thing to do to these young, athletic, rising, confident cats is you just make them work. Exhaust them, make them tired. And look, Jake Paul has proven to us he's serious about this and he's going to show up in shape. But it's a lot harder to feel like you're in shape, to feel like you can continue when you're eating 3-4 punches and then you're throwing something back and you're missing, or you're throwing something back and even if it lands, it's not affecting because their defense is so good, right? The best way to take the wind out of the sails of somebody like Jake Paul is to just keep him on his back foot, pressure, 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 pressure. And that's what Nate Diaz is known for in his striking, is pressure. It's not, oh my gosh, he's got that one punch power. Oh, look how explosive this guy is. That was Tyron Woodley. That was a Tyron Woodley much earlier in his career, right? Oh, it's not, look at his reaction time. Look how elusive he is. That's Anderson Silva 15 years ago, right? Now Jake Paul is getting a different test from a different type of fighter It is a volume striking proposition with Nate Diaz. And I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see how Jake handles it. I'm excited to see if Nate actually shows up with that kind of game plan now that this is a pure boxing match. He's an old dog. I don't think you can teach him new tricks at this point.
But his tricks might apply a bit better in a boxing match. You know, the pressure and the pace that he has. The fight that keeps standing out in my mind is Nick Diaz against Paul Daly. You know, just that volume up against the fence got to him eventually.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Michael Bisping made some pretty good points. For Jake Paul, this fight is still against a non-boxer, against a guy who's advanced in age. Nate Diaz is no longer young. So what does it prove to Jake Paul and the Jake Paul doubters and the Jake Paul fans, for that matter, if he can beat Nate Diaz in a boxing match? I don't know how much it proves. I think it's still a great fight to take because we all want to watch it. It's going to sell the pay-per-view numbers that he's probably hoping for. And even better, and we'll talk about this maybe another time, it potentially sets up a rematch under a different rule set in the sport of mixed martial arts. So far, Nate Diaz has rejected that premise. But if you get beat up in a boxing ring by this young, cocky kid, don't you then say, all right, fine, come join me in a real fight and let's see what happens. I'm kind of hoping for all of it. Sean O'Connell, Dan Hardy, lots to talk about in the MMA space and the boxing space. This is DAZN MMA.